It's the first time doctors have used the word polio in decades. They're talking about an illness that is gaining national attention, an illness that is also on the rise. It used to be called polio-like syndrome, but is now known as acute flaccid myelitis.
Now, it may sound a little scary, and for those suffering with it, it is. It's the sudden paralysis of one or more limbs, sometimes the sudden inability to breathe, basically polio of the 21st century. In the last 6 months alone, the Centers for Disease Control reports just over 100 cases in a total of 34 states. The average age of these patients is only 7. Most patients had a fever or respiratory illness before the paralysis symptoms occurred. About 2/3 of the children reported improvement after 19 days, while only one child fully recovered.
The CDC says it continues to test specimens from these patients for a wide variety of pathogens that can result in this syndrome.
Now imagine this mystery illness striking someone as little as only 2 years old. Meet little Lucian.
2-year-old Lucian Oliveira has been diagnosed with a mysterious polio-like syndrome after being misdiagnosed for a year.
I felt helpless. It was extremely frustrating. And it was hard to sit and not be able to help him.
Erin Oliveira says not knowing was the hardest part. When Lucian was 11 months old, he had an ear infection. But then something worse happened. He couldn't stand or use his legs. For months, doctors didn't know what was wrong. Finally, the family received an answer. Little Lucian has been diagnosed with polio-like syndrome.
You don't realize how much you have until something goes really, really wrong.
Doctors say Lucian's case is the first of its kind in his area. And since it's been decades since doctors have used the word polio, they're still researching all possibilities.
Really, it's unknown the severity of this for each individual. The thought is that it is permanent, but we don't know all the things that are going to happen to every patient.
Lucian has to wear a brace for his legs, and doctors say he will most likely never be able to walk on his own. But his parents say it's his smile and determination that keep everyone going.
You'll see him trying his hardest with the canes, and that determination makes me keep going forward.
Now keep in mind, doctors say this paralysis is unpredictable and there are still many unanswered questions.
So, should we be concerned here on Delmarva? Joining us today to respond to that question is Dr. James Cockey from the Wicomico County Health Department. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Tell us more about acute flaccid myelitis. What is it and where does it come from?
And there's more unknown than there is known.
Right.
There has always been a low level of sudden neurological deficits in all ages, including children. Last fall, a CDC publication printed a report from California where they had noticed what they thought might be a higher than usual incidence of that syndrome going back over 2 years. There was also a report from Colorado where hospitals noted, again, what they thought might be a higher than usual incidence of it.
Now, some people think it has something to do with the enterovirus or West Nile. Is there any substance behind that?
The consciousness of the possible increase in the acute flaccid myelitis came about in the fall. That was the same time when there was a significant respiratory infection in children that was found to be caused by this enterovirus D68. Since they were occurring at about the same time, it raised the question whether the virus was causing the neurological syndrome. It isn't known. A few people with the neurological syndrome did have the virus found in the respiratory secretions. When it was studied in the central nervous system by spinal tap, it was not found there. Many different pathogens are being studied in these children, and there isn't an answer yet.
And it's 34 states we're seeing it. So is there something that, me as a parent, should I be looking for something?
If the child gets sick, it's going to be obvious, and it'll be terrifying to any parent that all of a sudden they can't move an arm or leg, or they're having trouble breathing, and anybody who sees it will be very frightened and will seek medical attention early. It generally preceded by a minor cold symptoms that children get all the time and that usually don't require medical attention.
Is the health department here on alert? Are you guys doing anything to prepare for this?
We're doing what the CDC and the Maryland Department of Health and Mental Hygiene want us to do, which is that if these cases appear, to report them to state and to CDC authorities so they can be aggressively studied, and hopefully eventually we'll get an answer if there is a new pathogen out there causing that. And it's also possible that this is nothing new. We don't have precise data on the incidence of these acute neurological deficits, it's possible that this is no different from the baseline for many years.
Now, something that is making a comeback, and we're seeing even here in Virginia, is measles. Are you seeing it?
The state of Maryland has not had a case of measles reported for several years. Nationally, measles has been at a very low rate for many years since the vaccinations have been available. Last year was a record high for recent years nationally with over 600 cases. Currently, there's an outbreak out of California, out of Disneyland out there, where some person had it and infected many other people. There's an outbreak that's over around 70 people now.
Now you were saying measles is very contagious, and the best way to prevent it is a vaccine?
Yes, and the vaccination has been around for decades. It's a standard recommended vaccination. Every pediatrician recommends it to every child. Unfortunately, in recent years, through some science that really is not science, it's pseudoscience, there's been an unreasonable fear about the dangers of the side effects from the vaccinations. And many well-meaning parents are refusing the measles, the MMR vaccination for their children, and that is leading to more cases of these diseases and ultimately just some deaths from them.
What about adults? I mean, I've heard some chatter that there may be some adults at risk of getting measles.
Yeah, and that is true, but the risk is vanishingly small. There's no vaccine that's 100% effective, and the vaccinations that adults received as children are not 100% effective. It's also true that adults, when you reach adulthood, there's a good chance that you've been exposed to somebody who may have had measles, and we rarely see it in adults. The few cases we do see are overwhelmingly in children.
Well, something everybody's becoming exposed to now is the flu, and that's it's hitting hard this year.
It is. The good news is that the wave of influenza over the last 5 or 6 weeks, there are indicators that it has peaked and it's starting to come down. And the story of the influenza vaccination this year is another caution about vaccinations. There's a great deal of guesswork in picking what goes into the influenza vaccine every year. And this year, the current dominant strain of influenza does not match up well with the influenza vaccine, so the protection for the vaccine is relatively low.
Now we're seeing a lot of flu numbers. Are these numbers coming from the flu swab? Is that the only way to know?
There are many different technically complex ways that epidemiologists measure the activity of influenza. The actual laboratory diagnosis of influenza from those swabs is one of them, but it's a relatively small contribution to the overall epidemiological understanding of flu activity.
Now we talked about three very serious conditions, but to boil it all down, what is the must go to the doctor sign that we need to be looking for?
In general, for influenza, healthy large children and adults will not need to go to the doctor if they're able to get around the house and take care of themselves. It's highly unlikely that medical interaction will help. The people that are most vulnerable and at risk of complications are small children, elderly people, and chronically ill people, and the threshold for seeking medical help is lower with those populations. But anyone who's having trouble breathing, who for many hours can't hold any food down, is getting too weak to walk, needs medical attention.
All right, good information. Dr. Cockey from the Wycomico County Health Department, thank you for joining us this afternoon. And if you would like to learn more about the illnesses we discussed today, you can visit WBOC.com. Click on our picture on the top of the page. It's another illness that is not only potentially deadly, but also very preventable. Cervical cancer. Up next, we hear the alarming statistics surrounding the cancer that's plaguing young women today, how both early detection and treatment are essential.
And many doctors are urging young patients to get vaccinated to ward off HPV, but one young girl says those experts are dead wrong. Her story next. Delmarva Life, we'll be right back.